Yo, this is Steve Bloom, and you're watching Moana Nui Podcast. We'll be starting soon. Don't go anywhere.
Aloha mai everyone. Happy Thursday. Happy Talent Thursday. Welcome to tonight's episode of the Moana Nui Podcast. Tonight we are featuring our monthly series, Talent Thursdays, with our partner CAPAW, the Center for Asian Pacific American Women. And we are joined tonight by our host, Sue Ann Hong, a friend, a colleague, a mentor, a leader, someone who we are really honored to be in partnership with. She has been doing some amazing work with our Asian Pacific American communities. And we're really excited to have her on again tonight for her second official episode here on the Moana Nui Podcast. Tonight, we're going to talk about communication. And communication is one of those things that you would think would be easier than it is, but it's not. Whether it be in our personal lives or in our professional lives, it's really important for us to consider all of the different modes of communication and how we can use it to be an influence and an advocate for both ourselves and the communities around us. So, without further ado, I want to bring Sue Ann and our wonderful power panelists, so many speakers from various parts of the industry. Really excited to hear what they have to offer and teach us tonight on this important topic. So let's bring them on. Hello, ladies. Aloha. Welcome to our show.
Hello.
Aloha.
Aloha. It's great to be here.
Yes, thank you guys so much for being a part of our show. I'm going to hand it over to Sue Ann now. And for those who are watching, thank you for joining us. Please feel free to engage with our panelists in the comments, and we will bring your questions forth as we go along tonight. So once again, thank you, ladies.
Thank you so much, Moana.
Thanks, Moana.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. Again, my name is Sue Ann Hong, and I'm the president and CEO for the Center for Asian Pacific American Women. And I have some amazing guests tonight, and they are going to share all their wisdom. They're going to share their experiences, and we're going to also have some fun because, we're going to keep things real in this podcast. So I want to introduce Daphne Kwok, Vice President, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at AAPI Audience Strategy. Welcome, Daphne.
Thank you.
I also have Ebony Wyatt, Customer Vice President for Target Admire for General Mills, and she's also EbonyWyatt.com. She has her own business, so she's an entrepreneur with Ebony Speaks. Welcome, Ebony.
Thanks, Sue Ann.
And I always say that, by the way, these women, incredible leaders, have multiple things going on, multiple hats. So I think what you're going to hear also is that they have other responsibilities beyond their, what I call the primary day job. So I think we're going to have so much to talk about. And finally, we have Lynn Mueller, who's the founder of Mueller and Associates, LLC, Leadership Coaching and Design. Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yes. And by the way, I just wanted to share that Lynn and I had our introductory call, and then I asked her to be on this podcast. So nothing like an introductory call to invite a speaker. I just want to say. So let me just start off with just having your personal stories told a little bit. So let me start with Ebony. Ebony, tell us a little bit about your heritage and your background.
Yes. So I'm originally from Arkansas, and I'm biracial. So my mother is Black and my dad is white. I identify as African American. That's a little bit about my heritage. I was raised by my grandmother, so I think that's another dimension of who I am. I'm a mom, a wife, and a boss. I have 3 kids. I'm married to William. So there is never a dull moment in the Wyatt household. And as you shared, Sue Ann, I also own my own small business. So I teach workshops to badass women who want to elevate in their career on top of my full-time job. So a little bit about me.
I love it. And trust me, we're going to unpack all those things in a little bit. Daphne, how about you?
Well, good evening, good day to everybody. Thank you, Sue Ann, once again for having me join. I'm Daphne Kwok. I'm Chinese American and first generation born in the U.S. Or second generation here in the U.S. My parents immigrated from China after the fall, right before the fall in 1949. My mom went to the Philippines before she came to the States for her college degrees. My dad moved to the States for his, and they met in Philadelphia, of all places, right? Brotherly love, right? So that's where I was born as well, too. I've literally grown up inside the DC Beltway my entire life. And I've been involved in the Asian American community my entire career. So very fortunate to still have my parents. So I am a caregiver now for my 96-year-old father and my 88-year-old mother. I'm just very, very grateful that they're still very active. My dad still beats us in Rummy Cube every night. So it's a lot of fun.
Well, and Daphne, I mean, your parents actually come to conferences with you, which I find incredible. Like they go to sessions, workshops, and I'm like, wow, still learning.
Absolutely. They're the social butterflies.
Absolutely. All right, Lynn, what about you?
So aloha, everyone. Hawaii is my homeland, I'm proud to say. I grew up in Honolulu. I'm third generation Asian American. My dad, Japanese, and my mom, Chinese. I didn't realize how significant that was growing up. Historically, ethnically, their generation was about assimilating into the American culture and especially with language. And in their case, it helped because now they could speak the other person's, language, Chinese or Japanese. I relocated from Hawaii to the Bay Area about 20 years ago and have made Marin my home. Most recently, I call myself recovered from full-time employment. The last decade, I was in a global post, and every day it was 5 a.m. reveillees because I was the last mainland U.S. time zone. I graduated from a color-coded Outlook calendar and logging about 100,000 miles a year for business. So I have recovered. I'm in my season 2 now, which is what I call my retirement, because I think the series can still go on. There's more of the story to unfold versus ending it. I get to do a lot of hard work these days, coaching and consulting. I have a beautiful and talented daughter who's studying her for a master's work in Berlin, and really happy to be here with all of you.
Incredible. And by the way, like I said with Lynn, it was our first time meeting, but I think her story and her journey is pretty compelling. So I think this is a really great opportunity to have her share with everyone her journey. But let me start with Daphne. You've been in the civil rights area in the AAPI community, I mean, for a long time, and the impact has been so wide. Can you share with the audience about your journey?
Well, I will tell you that growing up as a good Chinese American kid, our family never talked about politics around the dinner table. It was all about music in school, even though my dad worked for the federal government. And so politics was the furthest thing from my mind. I grew up in a very white suburb of DC, and so really didn't have any classmates of color until I went to college. And I think that changed everything. I went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut, the first time in my life to be with Asian American students. And out of a class of 600, we had the largest class at that time. It was 29 Asian American students out of 600. And so my 4 years on college campus, I thought I was having fun. I was just socializing and partying. And little did I know that I was actually doing some major coalition building and learning skills that I ended up using to this day. And I didn't realize I was organizing, right? So after college, I ended up, and I actually did not have a job. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I have to thank my mom, like mom knows best, and thank goodness for her friends who were in positions to hire. It was the Organization of Chinese American Women. But I also was involved, had joined the Organization of Chinese Americans, the local chapter, when I came back to DC. And so I was just socializing, having fun, and sort of fell into working for the Asian American community. And this was in the 1990s. And there was not much going on in the Asian community, especially here in DC. I sort of fell into becoming the executive director of the Organization of Chinese Americans. I like to say and tell people that in 1990, there were exactly 4 people staffing the entire National Asian American Civil Rights effort. It was myself and an assistant, and the Japanese American Citizens League's DC lobbyist and an assistant. And this was pre-computers, really. So I've had a chance to hopefully help to build the Asian American community, especially the national level and especially in the advocacy political field. So one thing is people should definitely keep their options open. You never know what might be ahead of you. And I've hopefully have tried to make a difference in bringing the AAPI community to the table, the political table.
Absolutely. I don't think you accidentally fell into an executive director role. I don't think that's accidental, but we can talk a little bit more about that in terms of some of the skill sets. But Lynn, you've worked multiple sectors and now you're kind of, and you call it retirement, but I'm going to redefine retirement these days because all that means is another career. So tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, in a word, I think it was meandering. You remember the show Bewitched, where the husband, Darren Stevens, worked in advertising? Well, I decided at a very young age that I wanted to be in advertising. When it came to choosing my major, I chose marketing because you could have more than one. I chose marketing over accounting because you could have more than one right answer in marketing.
I like that answer.
I've held, so my career was in the marketing and media sectors. I've held general management roles at a broadcast television network affiliate, a film and video production company, a general management role at the largest cable MSO operator. And my early management stints were as a media salesperson. And I also was head of client services for an ad agency. And I think that informed where my career path wanted to go. All of it, I think all of it being my love for marketing and knowing how hard and gratifying being a leader, having a passion for leadership, led me to my global post, heading executive development for the world's largest communication and marketing group, where I designed and I delivered leadership programs in over 30 countries and 6 continents, therefore logging the 100,000 plus miles a year. I think the most interesting thing is that it was, for me, always about wanting to learn. And so I was never technically qualified for my next job. I was always interested in learning, and I was so lucky to have mentors and guides who believed in me and in my potential. My friends used to say that I had career karma, and they were right. I was so lucky, and I try to pay it back, and I try to pay it forward.
Well, first of all, 100,000 miles, I'm just like, I'm already like laying down because that's exhausting just thinking about it. But the fact that what you were delivering at the scale you were delivering, so pretty incredible there. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about just kind of your journey and climbing. But Ebony, you know, Ebony and I met for Leadership Coalition through Walmart and through Working Mother Media at the time. And we just clicked immediately. And I just knew with her energy and with her, you know, and she she uses her voice, and I admired that about Ebony. So Ebony, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yes, so I went to college with the intent of going to law school. And so I majored in business. I chose finance. It's funny, when Lynn said accounting, there's only one right answer. I like numbers, but not that much. So I didn't want to do accounting, so I chose finance. And I had a minor in political science, but I finished, I think, 4 hours short of the minor, because once I got into political science, I was like, this is not my jam. And so it's been interesting. So I went into business. I interned for General Mills. I did not know these types of jobs existed, to be frank. I interned for General Mills in Arkansas, working on the Walmart account. And I was like, this is a pretty cool job. These brands are fantastic and these people are incredible. And so they offered me a job after the internship ended. And I went into my senior year knowing I had a job with General Mills. I've been there now. It'll be 19 years this summer. I was the first Black woman sales director in the company's history. And I just think a little girl from Arkansas raised by her grandmother with big dreams and big goals and just a lot of support around me. And then about a year and a half ago, during the pandemic, I'd always had this idea that I wanted to do a side business that involved speaking and kind of sharing my story. And I put an idea together and I'm like, I'm just going to go. So I'm going to get a website together. I'll get all my business stuff set up, my LLC. And I thought that I would just be doing keynote speeches. But guess what? During the pandemic, it's harder to find you. It's a little bit different. It didn't happen the way I thought. And so I was talking to a girlfriend of mine, and it's great to just have just cheerleaders and idea generators in your network. And she said, Ebony, why don't you teach a workshop? You always teach workshops at General Mills, to the Black Champions Network, at our company. You should just teach a workshop. And I was like, actually, you know what? I have some content from a talk that I did at the University of Arkansas, which is my alma mater. And so I took that, kind of repackaged it, and I had my first Zoom workshop, and I had 22 women show up. And it was powerful. Now, of course, that first group is the women in your circle that want to support you. We had the workshop, I think it was from 6:30 to 8 o'clock. We went to 8:30 because the sense of community was so strong. I don't think I slept that night. And my friends are texting, they're like, Ebony, there's something special here. Don't stop. And so since then, I probably taught about 20 workshops to companies, to nonprofits, to individual women who sign up for my workshop. So I teach one on building your badass network. It's really all about empowering people to build the network, maintain the network. When you get the meeting, what do you say? How do you keep the connectivity? And then the other workshop is building your badass brand. It's really around personal branding, leaning into your strengths, understanding what your goals are. How do you articulate that really powerfully? And so it's just been fun. So I've done that for the last year and a half. And I knew that I always wanted to do corporate plus. And Carla Harris, I don't know any of you all out there that are listening have heard of her, but she's a Black woman executive on Wall Street, and she's a powerful speaker. And I've heard her probably 4 times. And she was always the model for me. It's like, I want to do what she does. And she was just so inspiring. She had these great business tips. I remember a few years ago, she came to General Mills, and I remember my CEO jotting down notes. Like, that's how powerful her tips, her delivery. And so I knew I wanted to be the Carla model in terms of like have an impact in corporate America, because me being at the table, having a seat at the table, being able to elevate other women of color is really important to me. But I knew that I wanted to touch women outside of my company. And so that's where the entrepreneurial journey came for me. And for me, it's been confidence building. And I've seen the confidence I've been able to help build in other women. And it's just been a fantastic journey. And I'm not sure where it's going to lead. Everybody's like, are you going to do this full time? I'm like, that's not the plan. but I really enjoy being able to support more women outside the walls of my company.
I love that because, it sounds like there's also been some self-discovery time there from that aspect, and parts of yourself that maybe got unleashed a little bit.
Yes.
I love that.
Who knew I was creative? Like I make all my own, I made my own business cards a few weeks ago. I was like, look, I may need to start a company just building, creative marketing. But again, if you don't exercise different muscles, you don't know what else you're good at. And I'm just grateful that I was able to lean into it, and partly out of necessity. I was like, I'm not making enough money to hire somebody to do all this stuff yet. And so I found this creative edge, and I'm like, I kind of like doing my own stuff. I don't know if I'll offload that. So it's been really fun.
That's incredible. So let me ask all of you this since our topic is around communication. This is an area that I get questions all the time from Asian BRGs, Business Resource Group, Employee Resource Group, different companies, where it's always a question around effective communication to drive influence, and especially for Asian Americans. So this is a frequent question I get. So based on the model minority myth that we deal with, cultural values, and the stereotypes, I want to know what it is that you think that you were able to do in order to be where you're at now in terms of communication skills, and what were you able to do? So I'm going to open this one. Anybody who wants to go first, I'll open it up. But there's a reason why you're sitting where you're sitting. And a lot of it has to do with the way you communicate. So any thoughts around that?
Well, maybe I'll share because I like to tell people about my own personal story, because hopefully it's an inspiration to others, because I was painfully shy as a child, even up through college. In school, growing up, right, we're supposed to listen to the teacher. We don't speak up in class. We're not supposed to question the teacher. And going to classes where you're graded on class participation. Oh my God, I was just sweating bullets throughout college. I'm like, oh my God, it was terrible. And so I was really actually very shy, right, and very quiet, and didn't really speak up. And but I did take a leadership role in my college. And I think, and now this whole concept of belonging, I really believe in that whole concept of belonging. At my university, I really felt a sense of belonging. And so I think that's where I really started to open up. And just that leadership role put me out there, right? I had to lead meetings, I had to speak in public and whatnot. But then for me, it really happened that I became the executive director of the Organization of Chinese Americans in 1990. And now remember, I'm still very painfully shy, but we're dealing with hate crimes, anti-affirmative action attacks, anti-immigration legislation, all of this happening at the federal level. And it was myself and the JACL representative, sitting around a table of all the leading civil rights organizations like the NAACP, at that time, the National Council of Raza, American Jewish Committee, Anti-Defamation League. And it's like, and two Asians, right? And it's like, if I didn't speak up and my colleague, didn't speak up, the Asian community would not have any voice at the national level in the area of civil rights. And when we were under tremendous attack during the 1990s. And so I was sort of propelled into position. I realized that if I didn't speak up and my colleague didn't speak up, well, who's going to speak up for the Asian American community? And so I learned to speak up, because I was thrown literally into major press conferences at the Capitol, at the White House, speaking up on behalf of the Asian community. And so, it's like really getting thrown into the fire. I mean, I was on, major TV interviews, the Today Show, blah, blah, blah. And I sort of just willed it within me to speak on behalf of the community, knowing that here's a chance to get our story heard. So that's why now I tell young ones, it's like, go join the debate class team, go join a Toastmasters, do rhetoric. The spoken communications is so critical. And the writing, I was very weak in writing, but boy, getting thrown into an executive director position where you had to write press releases just like that. I would tell young ones, like, you don't have time to write 5-10 page papers when you get in the work world. You got to boil it down into bullet points, and so this is what I hope to be able to impart, but also hope to share with people that you can get outside the comfort zone if you really believe in what you're doing and hopefully what you're working on behalf of. So the story I like to end with is that I think I've shocked my family. I've shocked all of our closest family friends that seen me grow up as a little kid, because I had the greatest honor of speaking at the White House in a Rose Garden ceremony in front of President Clinton as the Asian community presented to him during May APA Heritage Month, an event. And, who would have thought that I would have been in front of the President of the United States in the Rose Garden speaking on behalf of the Asian American community? I don't think I ever would have thought that, but you just are put in positions that you can't say no to, because then you would be letting down your community. So anything's possible, but communications is so, so key and powerful.
Well, Daphne, that's so inspiring, because you were so purpose driven that you said you willed yourself.
I absolutely
to do what you had to do, even though you were sweating bullets.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's incredible.
I've almost hyperventilated several times, literally.
Yes, absolutely. I can understand that. Lynn, what about you? What's your journey been like? You're talking about global communication and effectiveness as you're driving these learning products and things that you're creating. How did you do it?
Yeah, I love that. I love Daphne's story. The leaders that I've worked with mostly it's like they're the opposite. They're like wired to sell their products or their services with their clients, or to share their point of view ahead of understanding what the clients or the people needed. So I'm taking another tact at this question. I offer that communication is two-way, and that it compels us to do as much to receive communication and to hear what our clients or the people in our organization or our teams need, ahead of influencing with our perspective or our point of view. And then so earning the right to offer our perspective, earning the right to sell to our clients based on what we hear their needs are. And I would also offer that listening is not passive. It's so active. It's not the easiest thing to do. When you think about, when was the last time I really, really felt listened to? Outside of this I feel like I'm being listened to, but not. So, when do you feel like you're really listened to? It doesn't happen as often as I think people are deserving of. Not listening to make my next point or refute yours, but listening to understand, listening to support, listening for possibility, listening for emotion. That is active listening. I try to, so in my communication, I try to be a good listener. And I think what has helped impact my brand as a leader is to show up authentically and intentional and inclusive in my communication.
I love that. Is there any one particular skill or tactic or anything that you think could help our audience when you think about that inclusive type of communication? What's an example?
Yeah, I think it starts with having a mindset of curiosity. If I want to learn about you, learn about what's important to you, learn about where you came from, learn about where you want to go next. I think having that mindset of curiosity suspends your personal agenda in trying to influence and sell. So I would say, I would ask myself, being intentional, looking back on my conversations, ask myself, did I really stand in that curious mindset? Did I walk in that perspective? in that conversation, in that communication.
Well, and what I like about that is it also maybe suspends your judgment when you do that versus, like evaluating what the person is saying. And I think that really helps.
Yeah, or hijacking their agenda. We all we pile on. We're excited. I think the motivation is, I want to tell you my story. And I think it requires, I think there's a pause that is refreshing when you give someone the space to say and be heard.
Absolutely. Ebony, what about you?
So I heard bits of me in Daphne's example, in Lynn's examples, and what she leans into. I remember, so I've always been really outgoing. But then I got thrown into this corporate space where it was really new to me. New language, new lingo, new styles, very different than my Southern upbringing and being raised with my grandmother. Just the mode of communication was very different. And I remember getting to the end of year one with General Mills, and we had an end of the year presentation, all the new hires. And I bombed. I was nervous. I was sweating bullets. I could barely get through it. I was just a nervous wreck. And so I remember one of my colleagues said, you should think about Toastmasters. And so I signed up for Toastmasters. And for those of you who may not know, Toastmasters is a national organization that helps you with public speaking. And anybody can join. You pay a fee. You go to meetings. There's local chapters all throughout the country. But I only went to one Toastmasters class. And I went in the first one and I walked out with a ribbon for the best table topics. And so I tell you that to say what can be a weakness at some point could also be a strength, or it could be a strength in different audiences. And so especially for those of you who may be early career who are listening, just because you are not great at something from the start doesn't mean that you won't be fantastic at it by the time you have some experience. So some of the things that I really try to lean into from a communication standpoint is always starting with the audience in mind. What is your audience? Who are they? What do they care about? What do they want to hear from you? If I am speaking to a group of Black women, I'm going to have some different communication modes, some different, I may do a little bit different storytelling. But if I have a group of white corporate men that I work with, I know what's important to them. I know how to attack from a business standpoint. And so one, just always starting with the audience in mind. Number two is having 3 main points, because I feel that effective communicators can get their points across and get in and get out. People who talk too much, talk too long, they're rarely really good communicators. My other 2, storytelling. This one was when I used to see these amazing storytellers and think, I'll never be able to do that. Like, where do they get all these stories? And then I started kind of just thinking through and telling my story and finding like, oh, this is compelling. Like people want to hear more. And then I'd start to tell other people's stories, because you don't have to tell just your stories, right? I met a young woman. Here's what her experience was with my workshop. Right. So I thought all the stories had to be mine, and I would have to have a bank of like 100 different stories to pull people in. And that wasn't the case once I got into it. And then the last 2 for me, Lynn, you mentioned one of these. Authenticity is really important. People want to feel and see you. And when I show up as my whole best self, that's when I'm the best communicator. And then the last one is energy. For me, as I've started on this journey of workshops, the word that just keeps coming back to me is energy. So I'm like, okay, that's important. I've got to make sure that is something that is part of my brand. That is what people expect from me. Even after I've had a long day, how do I show up and have a lot of energy? Because that is what resonates with my audience. And so again, who is your audience? How do you show up authentically? What are your 3 main points? And then how do you incorporate some storytelling in there to just really draw that audience in and captivate them?
I love that. Well, basically, you're creating connection with the storytelling. And then I can only remember like 3 things anyway. Like after that, my mind, I just can't do it. So from a capacity perspective, the 3 to 5, right? You cannot have 20 priorities to communicate. So what are the gotta haves the most important? So I think that's a great point. So let me ask you this. So one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about is that, gender, racial equity in terms of how this comes across at work. So as an example, being interrupted in meetings is predominantly shared by women's experiences. So a lot of women will say, I get interrupted in meetings quite a bit, and how do I get myself back into the conversation? And so I wanted to ask if you had a situation where you were interrupted in some manner, and how do you get yourself back in and without feeling like you weren't heard?
I'll jump in here, Sue Ann, because this happens pretty often in a corporate workspace. And at the beginning, I was really thrown off by it. Like it just kind of freaked me out, and I kind of just shut down. And I noticed it happening more and more. And I'm like, I have to continue to get my point across. And so I started to think of what are my key words when someone is interrupting me? How do I build my confidence and stay strong in the moment? So a couple of examples. One, for example, is, hey, let me finish my point, and I'll open the floor up to you. So when I feel like I'm being cut off, like that's a powerful statement for me to make. Sometimes, depending on how aggressive the other person is who is trying to cut in, I will use a verbal hand gesture. Say, 1 more second. I'm just finishing up my last point, because some people need that visual cue and that verbal cue. But think about what are the statements you use to help you stay on track. And then the other thing that I try to do, especially once you get the seat at the table, how do you create allyship for other women who may be in the same situation? So, hey, my colleague Coretta had something to say. Hey, I think Sue wanted to add something to the conversation. So even allowing those spaces for others who may not feel as comfortable to speak up, how do you create an invitation for them to come into the conversation?
I love that. The visual cue as well as the verbal cue. That's great, depending on who your audience is. So Daphne or Lynn, any other experiences you might have had and how you handled it?
I'd love to riff off a seat at the table. So I think it's about confidence. Whether you're interrupted intentionally or just because someone's excited, confidence that you have a voice and you're there to use it. For me, it's about having my inner critic or my gremlin, and I name him Tiny Tom after the Tom Hanks character in the movie Big. And I remember viscerally that the first day in my last job, which was a huge job for me, I didn't come from training or HR, and all of a sudden I was the global head of executive development for this large company. And sitting around a boardroom in Midtown NYC with accomplished senior and mostly men. And I felt like a kid sitting at the big person's table, like I needed a booster to look over the table so that, I can feel it. What Daphne mentioned before, that it feels visceral. And so I think a lot of it comes from a lot of feeling less than or not as confident comes from this imposter syndrome, not being deserving or not being ready, not being as eloquent enough. So I thank my gremlin because it compels me to be prepared. And if I'm prepared, I'm more confident. If I'm prepared, I can be more spontaneous. It challenges me to step out of my comfort zone. I think, Ebony, you mentioned that before about growth. And so did you, Daphne, about, being propelled out of your comfort zone into what I call the growth zone. But the growth zone doesn't have to be the panic zone, right? We're not going to die. and being okay, knowing we have allies in the room. And so judging the quality of your interaction, your communication, your meetings, when you look back and asking yourself, did I really stretch? Did I stand in that growth zone and take some risks and try some new things? So yeah, I thank my gremlin, but I don't let him come to any meetings with me.
I love the fact that you named it Tiny Tom. I think that's hilarious. I love that. And that's probably actually helpful because you recognize it and then you name it and you're like, okay, now I can put it aside and move forward with what I need to do. But that's pretty cool.
It's lighter. It's not as ominous, it's not as dark or yeah. And Tom has helped me to be more prepared and to be
Exactly. I love that. Daphne, what about you?
I think for me, and it's interesting because today and at work, we had a session on courageous conversations, and being able to have courageous conversations. And, there's an assessment and where do you rate, are you more on the quiet side? And so actually for me, yes, I went more on the quiet side. And then, so for me, it's always been, I sort of let things roll. But then I, try to me, it's quality over quantity, right? So hopefully that I will be able to make a really good statement, right, at the right time. And I think that's what people say about me as well, too. It's like, I don't particularly speak a lot because I don't believe in just running your mouth, right? It's like, if you have something to say, it's to add to the conversation. And so I think people have often said to me, it's like, they know that when I actually speak up, that it's, adding to the conversation, right? And I'm not just talking for the sake of talking. So, I think that's very important as well, too.
Absolutely. I had a boss who was an introvert. And one of the things she says, Sue Ann, I do not like to speak, but I have to get my voice in there. So she goes, I use the get in and get out method is what she said. I get in, say what I need to say, and I pop back out because I still have to use my voice, but I have to stay there. So I thought that was a great tip. Now, one of the questions that I think that would be helpful for the audience too, and this is not necessarily the question that I added here, but I think it's important, has to do with if I'm negotiating something with my boss or somebody above me, and let's say that if it's salary or if I don't agree with, my assessment or there's some type of a disagreement, how do I get my point across and how do I communicate and can you give an example of what that approach might be?
When there's a disagreement?
Yes, maybe I don't agree with the assessment or maybe I have a differing opinion. How do I present myself?
Got it. I'll take a stab at this one because it actually happened to me several years ago, where I got a performance review that I did not agree with the commentary in the performance review and the rating. And the one thing I would tell you is make sure you are allowing yourself the time to process and to be calm in the moment. And so when it was delivered to me, I took it in. I said, I need some time to process. I'd like to come back to you and talk to you tomorrow because I have some differing points of view in terms of what you just shared with me. And I think that's really important because when it's a difficult conversation, you need to be prepared and you need to give yourself the mental space to do it where you can have time to process it, get your thoughts down on paper, and be prepared to show up more powerfully. So I did that. So I took that evening to process. I wrote down my key points and I came back in and I shared with him. And it was two-way dialogue. He was very receptive. And he had a point. I had a point. He had a counter. I said, well, let me show you. Well, how do you think she was able to do that work? How do you think it was enabled? And he was, Ebony, I didn't even think you were the one behind the scenes, like making sure everything was moving forward. And so he was very open and he said, you know what? You presented a compelling case to me. Thank you. He's like, sometimes, Ebony, I'm going to admit that we don't put the time into these things that we should. And I'm going to make some changes. Now, he couldn't make changes to the number, and the number wasn't that bad. But I thought I deserved more. But he was able to change the commentary because I was not comfortable with the commentary that was in that performance review. And at that point, I was 29 years old. And so it took a lot for me to say, I don't agree with this, to a white male who was probably 15 years my senior. But just, I tell you all that to say, you can do it, but don't respond out of anger. Especially, you have to know how you respond. And things like that can be fiery. Because I remember a different situation where I did not respond well when I got some bad news at work. But just taking that time to process, making sure you've thought it out, making sure you apply, just you're calm and you have facts. And I think if you present the facts and you have a reasonable person in front of you, they have no choice but to hear you. They may not behave differently. They may not make a change in that moment, but I think it's important for you to be heard. Now, since then, I've always done a self-appraisal because I will never be in that space again where somebody wasn't quite sure what my contributions were and they had to figure it out at 9 o'clock at night before the deadline the next day, right? And so now I make sure I do my own self-reflection in advance of the dates when those things are due. And I provide that to my manager because these are the speaking points from my point of view. Here are the metrics and accomplishments from my point of view. And I've been able to avoid any surprises ever since then.
I love that, Ebony, because you got to control the controllables, which is what you're doing. You're sharing your facts. Now, the ratings are not in your control, but you can at least present the facts and then the chips fall where they may. Yes. Right? Yep. So that's what I'm hearing you say is take control over what's in your control, which is your perspective about your results, what you contributed.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. What about you, Lynn?
Yeah, wow, there's so much to unpack there. I love that. Yeah, I think it's tough when you're the recipient of feedback that feels unfair, or feedback that isn't clear, because a lot of us don't give constructive feedback. I don't mean positive or negative. I mean objective, observable feedback, so that we can receive it in a way that doesn't feel subjective or unfair. So I think that's so when you're the recipient of that, I think that's tough. And I love how Ebony came back and presented her point of view, but honored the relationship. What I heard was it didn't, you didn't get angry or didn't terminate the relationship. You didn't, because I think that's the key. When we have conflict with our boss or our clients or our peers or our families, I think if we put the relationship ahead of the conflict and honor that, and see that relationship as a container to collaborate towards whatever the resolution is, then the conversation takes a different tone. It feels like you're not just advocating, and you're not going to avoid it because this is an important issue for you, but you'll work together to collaborate and come through the conflict on the other side with the relationship still intact. And so I love that example that Ebony shared with us. I think that's key.
Yeah. And you're making me think about the fact that if I know my boss cares about me, I'm willing to take on, I'm willing to take the message a lot better if I know they've got my back and I know that they care about me. And that's one of the key things, we look at Gallup and all these other, my supervisor cares about me. I have a best friend at work. There's certain things that impact your sense of belonging, to Daphne's point earlier. And the fact that I'm willing to, I can, as a boss, I could also deliver messages that are difficult better if I have that trusting relationship, right? Because they know where I'm coming from, that I have their back and I'm going to be honest about where I'm coming from, right? So Daphne, how about you?
Well, I think maybe I'll share an example, not exactly quite the same as Ebony and Lynn, but during the height of the George Floyd, and I'm in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and my boss is an African American, but we've been colleagues during my whole tenure at AARP, and she's been fantastic. But we were having a team conversation, and really the pain, and it was really so painful for everybody during the George Floyd time period. But it was and our team is primarily African American. There are like 2 of us that are Asian, right, and 2 Hispanic, but primarily African American. And so, there was so much centered around the African American, and me of all people, I totally I don't want to take anything away from what the African American community was experiencing, anything at all, because my work has been in coalition with all of the communities. But I also wanted to raise that the Asian American community was in tremendous pain as well, too, as a result of the COVID, the anti-Asian hate stuff as well, too, and so. But at the time, my boss made a comment that was sort of like, but this is really impacting the African American community. But I really wanted her to know that I was in just as much pain, seeing what my African American friends and colleagues were going through, but also wanting to raise the pain in the Asian community. But because she is such a good listener, as we've talked about, how important it is to listen. At that point, it was very much focused on African American. But after that, in other meetings, especially in leadership team meetings with the broader, leadership at AARP, she would bring up the Asian American community. So I know that she heard me in that session, even though, we were so focused on the African American. So it does really, you have to be able to bring things up sensitively, in the right tone, and with empathy as well too. But it's also to help to diversify the conversation as well.
I love that, and the fact that it's with compassion, that listening for the other perspective, and giving it merit. It's not just one particular community; it impacts other communities. And that connectivity. So that's huge. And I appreciate that, because Daphne, you're such a big supporter of all communities. I mean, I think I've asked you for different representation beyond Asian American communities when we have conversations. So I appreciate the support. So let me ask you this. So we've talked a lot about the individual level in terms of communication, but you're also at a level where you're communicating on behalf of the company or the organization that you support. So I'm curious, when you're driving communication at that larger scale, and it's kind of one way, how do you think through the communication plan? What are you thinking about? How do you formulate it, just from a broader scale? Because there could be a lot of room for miscommunication. So anybody want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, Sue Ann, I still start with the audience in mind. So my largest speaking event was this past January, and we reached an audience of over 4,000 people virtually. Now, it was virtual, so it's a little bit different, but Lynn talked about intentionality, and I knew it was an MLK breakfast event. Minneapolis and General Mills sponsors one of the largest Martin Luther King Jr. celebrations in the country. And I was the chair this year. And as the chair, you have to give a speech. And I knew that coming in. And it's like 2 years in the making. You co-chair 1 year, you're the chair the second year. And I wanted to think through, one, okay, who is my audience? It is a very diverse audience, mostly corporate attendees, because our corporate sponsors invite most of their employees to the event. I know it's a diverse group because you will still have a swath of community. So the diverse community will show up. I know that there could be some kids in the room because guess what? Kids are out of school and it's virtual. So you could have a different audience. So one, really thinking through who is that audience? And then two, knowing the thing that's most compelling about the way I speak is sharing a piece of me. What is the piece of me that I'm willing to share? Again, my speech was to inspire, right? So you kind of, who is my audience? What is my goal? So your goal could be to communicate information. Your goal could be to inspire. Your goal could be to advocate. And so really thinking through kind of what is your goal? And then lastly, putting together a plan. And so my plan, it's been interesting. Like I work in the business, but I have this passion for diversity and inclusion that I still lead with, despite me being business first in my job. And so really thinking through who did I want to make sure saw themselves in my speech. I wanted people of color to see themselves in my speech. I wanted people who came from backgrounds that weren't perfect. And I gave some examples to see themselves in my speech. I wanted the corporate community leaders to see themselves in my speech. And so really thinking through that, and I wrote it. And because I was speaking on behalf of General Mills, I had a great partner from our corporate communications group who read it through, gave me some good pointers. And I tweaked it just a bit. I took about 90% of the feedback that she'd given me. There was 10% that didn't feel authentic to me and didn't seem like it would drive a major difference. So I left those pieces in and I delivered that speech and it hit. It did everything that I intended for it to do. But it's around planning. You got to be planful, intentionality. You've got to know your audience and what are you trying to communicate? I think that's really key. And then lastly, practice. When you are in front of a big group or when you know you will have a large audience, you have to, sometimes even I'll go up on the stage and I'll practice like it's the real deal. I did it in 2 takes and that was it. I was like, I think we got it. He said, I do too. And so just really, I think that planfulness is so important. You leave an impression on folks. So you really need to do the planning, do the work, and really be thoughtful around, is this message going to resonate with my audience?
I love that. And most importantly, does it ring true to your voice? Mm-hmm. Is what I'm hearing you say. And that's your authentic voice that's delivering that. So that's great. Daphne, what about you?
Well, I think one of the things, sort of deviating from your question, but one of the things, tips I want to share that somebody shared with me, and I think it was really very powerful. Is like, especially when we were in person, right? Going to events and speaking at in-person events. The person said, go to the event early, talk to people, pick up whatever information you can, and then build it into your speech, right? So that they get a sense that you really, as we say, authentic, right? But that you really get to know them, that you're here, that you're listening to what people are saying to you. And so that's one of the things I've really tried to do is I go to an event early. I try to pick up whatever interesting information I can. And especially if there are people there I know, I build them into my speech and acknowledge them as well. And I think that's one way that connecting to the audience is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like it creates kind of a warmth. And it creates an intimacy with the audience is what you're saying. And I'm sure they love hearing the fact that you're referring to your conversation. They appreciate it. That's great. I love that tip. What about you, Lynn?
Wow, I don't think I could have said it any better than Daphne or Ebony. I know I couldn't have said it any better. I guess I'll just double down on the connection part. That connecting with the audience first and foremost so that they do hear us. You know, I thought about tonight. I hope that, and it's hard on a screen in a box and we can't see our audience. But I hope that they connect with us as humans, because that is what enables us to communicate authentically. I remember being influenced by a book that was written by Amy Cuddy, Presence, where she writes about the importance first of connecting ahead of dazzling our audience with facts or what it is we want to present with them. So connection ahead of the content that we're trying to communicate. That was very profound for me, and I heard you both say that beautifully.
I love that, because at the end of the day, I think people will be more willing to listen if you have that connection too. So that's great. So
I think the other thing too is to have fun, right? And so we're coming upon May APA Heritage Month, and today I was on a call. I'm going to do a presentation in New York, but once again, and it's in person, right? The first time in person for me in 2 years. But one of the things I said to the organizers, like especially for May APA Heritage Month, that I like to have fun. I give away little gifts. You educate facts through fun. So I love trivia. And so I throw out facts, but then also have little gifts, right, to give to people. And, I think that's been one of the most impactful ways, because people really listen, they learn and take away a few things from the speech, but they also have fun. And so you got to also have fun when you speak.
I love that. And we're all about it, and try not to feel guilty about having fun. Well, right. I feel like that's kind of like a cultural thing too, is like, I feel like if we have too much fun, I feel bad, but But let me start with Daphne. Daphne, what do you have coming for APA Heritage Month, since you just referred to it? What events are coming? What do you want the audience to know?
Well, so one of the events that hopefully many of you have seen, Jeff Yang and Philip Wang's Rise, very popular book right now about pop culture in the 90s, 2000s, 2010s. So we are bringing them. We're going to be sponsoring an event May 18th in the evening, and with some special guests as well too, but really using and learning about the pop culture, and as it ties back to really our values as Asian Americans, family values, intergenerational values as well. And then actually in June, we will have a Black Asian conversation as well too that we're working on. So those are a few of the things that we're doing.
Is there a place where people can go to sign up?
Well, the best thing is if you can join our AARP AAPI Facebook page, we'll be posting there. Or you can email me, dkwok@aarp.org, and we'll make sure we'll get the information to you as well.
Thank you so much, Daphne. What about you, Ebony? What would you like the audience to know?
I'd love for each of you to check out my website at ebonywyatt, WYATT.com. That's where you can find information about my upcoming workshops. And for those of you who love social media, you can find me at Ebony Speaks, the number 2 and the letter U. Ebony Speaks to You.
Thank you so much. And by the way, we had Ebony as a guest for our Shiro cohort, and they're still talking about it. So just the impact there is fantastic. What about you, Lynn? What would you like the audience to know?
I have no events or website, but I love the work that you are all doing. And for me, it's about community, and connecting with like-minded and different. So yeah, I do leadership coaching, and would be honored if anyone were interested in any leadership coaching that I could offer. And I put my email in the chat.
Absolutely. Incredible coaching. Think about her background, what she has to offer. If you guys are interested in coaching, reach out to Lynn. And I tell you what, these are 3 incredible leaders, women, representatives of community. And it was such an honor to be with all of you. And thank you for spending the time with us tonight. And I'm looking forward to, maybe we'll have to do a part 2 or something in the future. I think this was such a great group. So with that, Moana, I turn it back over to you.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, ladies. This was an amazing panel. I was feverishly writing notes here for our community and also for my own use as I navigate situations in my own life too. Definitely resonated with a lot of the messaging, particularly as it pertains to connections, maintaining the relationships, and building up community. I think when we keep those things in mind, as Sue-Ann was saying, it's a lot easier for us to accept the constructive feedback and figure out ways for us to apply them to grow ourselves, and even like just helping, look out for each other, right? I think everyone, regardless of it's in the workplace or in personal life, we can all benefit from a little gut check, right? Like, hey, let me nudge you over here. Let's think about something this other way. So, I really appreciate the time that you all have taken to be with us tonight. Thank you again, Sue-Ann, for bringing a powerhouse of panelists to our podcast. And for those who joined us tonight, thank you so much. We hope you guys enjoyed the content. Please, please, please look into the comments and follow our panelists, engage with them because you can really benefit from their expertise. Lynn, I will be in touch. I'll actually be in touch with all of you because I definitely think, you and again, thank you to Sue-Ann for connecting us in this one. So close out tonight. I know it's getting late, so thank you all, ladies, for being here tonight on this Thursday evening. We wish all of you a great rest of the week. Hopefully tomorrow will be quick so we can get to the weekend and have some mental health time. But yeah, that said, everyone, thank you so much. Have a great rest of the week and enjoy your weekends. We will be in touch soon. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will.
If this the land of the free, it was a freedom then. When they annexed Hawaii and called it Cedar Lands, without any type of payment and no signing off, called themselves a republic in 1894. 1.2 million acres overtaken from the native Hawaiians. When they resisted, the West retaliated in violence and erasure. The Hawaiian language is banned as part of colonialism's plan to expand,
Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple bombings of Kaho'olawe as a part of their ongoing war with Asia. Used it as a place for target practice. No consent or compensation. Colonizers call for annexation. No regard for all the locals. School will never let you know. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will. We will.
So if you put Hawaii into perspective, well, Black and Asian history is interconnected. Considering the fight with the Pacific, then of course versus Asia, they was treated as a middleman for war, but didn't let the Western colorism run its course. Cause dark skin was a sign of dignity to core. The land was taken in the name of capitalism, when prior to it was an actual kingdom. Clap back at the system.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple bombings of Kaho'olawe as a part of their ongoing war with Asia. Used it as a place for target practice. No consent or compensation. Colonizers call for annexation. No regard for all the locals. School will never let you know. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will. We will.
I'm Steve Bloom. I've been a voice actor for more than 30 years, playing characters like Wolverine, Starscream, Tank Dempsey from Call of Duty.
With Bloomfox Studios, I've learned so much about myself.
Learning to breathe, to no fear, to getting ugly in front of the mic.
One of the biggest changes I've noticed, at least for me, is how much my confidence level has gone up.
Done an Eastern European video game, an e-commerce commercial, a documentary. If you're thinking about getting into voiceover, just do it. Jump in.